Hello, humans. I hope you've been kind to each other. This is Time to Therapy. Let's talk. Let's get into today's session. So, this session, we are going to talk about a topic that is a bit somber, but it is a very important topic to discuss, right? Recently, it seems like a good amount of my clients have been dealing with grief. And at some level, we're all constantly actually kind of dealing with grief, but very formal grief, very formal grief. And so I wanted to discuss that briefly, right? I can always go into more detail later into a different video. There are 5 to 7 stages of grief, depending on your schoolhouse and what you think and how you feel. You could be talking about the 5 stages of grief, which the basics are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance, right? And then we're talking about, then you have the 7, which is in that same mixture. It's just a little more detail, which is going to be shock and denial, pain and guilt, anger and bargaining, depression. It's all a category all on its own, right? You have that upward turn where you're kind of having that calming effect, where you're kind of leading out of that depression and going kind of into acceptance. Then you have like restructuring, where you're kind of getting it together. You're working through how you feel and what you've been dealing with. And then we have acceptance and hope. We're going to discuss the 5 and have little caveats of this 7 because it's just naturally a part of the actual process. One of the things that I want to first touch on is, what do you mean by grief, right? A lot of times when we think about grief, we think about the loss of a loved one, a death of a friend or a family member or whomever. But grief has so many different avenues, right? Grief could be a breakup. You could be grieving the loss of a relationship. You could be grieving the loss of a job. You could be grieving, again, death, right? You could be grieving the knowledge that you have a terminal illness, right? You could be grieving the loss of a limb, what it means to now live their life like this, right? It could be the loss of sight, the loss of hearing. It could be even the loss of hair, right? We could be grieving our former self, the person we once were before whatever loss was incurred. Or we could also be grieving in a positive way, meaning we could also be grieving the person that we are gradually trying to become and what that means as we are separating from the person we once were. So grief has a lot of faces. But what is for sure is that it definitely has pretty much all the same stages. So let's discuss what those stages are in a bit more detail. We're not going full out into detail, but we are going to discuss them just a little bit to give you an idea of what we talk about in therapy when we are discussing grief. Now, the first stage, which I feel like this first stage may not always be the case, but more often than not, most of these stages, all of these stages are more often than not, because everybody deals with grief differently and at different times and different stages. So I even take that with a grain of salt by saying the first stage, because you can experience these stages all over the place. And we'll discuss that a little bit more too. But just going in order by the book, right? We're going to talk about denial. What does that mean? It is a level of defense, our self-defense mechanisms at play, where we are slowly taking in the information like, are you sure you're talking about the right person? I was just with them yesterday. Maybe we're mistaken. Maybe maybe this is not the right person. I think you have the names wrong. Maybe the birthday's off, right? This person was so healthy. Like, how did that even happen? This person's a great driver. This person's, in top flight, in the health bracket, or, I'm top of my game. Like, what do you mean? Like, I'm one of the best people at my job. Like, everybody loves me. It's that first onset of, is this really happening? That's denial. Then we kind of move into grief. And again, I say that very loosely because these can happen simultaneously. They can happen in all different directions because they're grief, right? The human emotion, the human mind is so multifaceted and complex. But like I said, we'll keep going down by the book. So now we're talking about anger. And we know what anger is. We are masking how we truly feel, right? Anger is that like surface level emotion on the iceberg chart where all the real emotions are under the water, like an iceberg, the real big pieces of it, and we just see the tip of the iceberg at the top of the water, which is anger. So anger is exactly what it sounds like, right? You are upset. You are finding every reason, right? You are either lashing out at people. There may be some transference there, meaning I'm getting upset with the ice cream man for not putting enough scoops on my ice cream cone, but I'm really just upset that I'm grieving, but he's going to get this energy today because I have nobody else to give it to and I just can't keep it to myself. So that's what we talk about with transference, right? Or even projecting, right? Like trying to tell somebody else how they feel because we feel that way. We see that in also a lot of these stages and not just in anger, but we'll kind of put that in that box. This could also look like lacking accountability, right? Like, oh, there's many different ways to approach what anger looks like, but you'll know. The next thing that we're going to go into is bargaining. Sometimes that can confuse people. When I say that. But bargaining is just a way to typically try to take control of the situation, right? Or to feel like you have some footing in what is happening or what has happened. So this could look like some what if statements or I should have statements, like I should have done this more, then that wouldn't have happened. What if I change my ways? What if I become more approachable at work, right? If we're talking about job loss, what if I exercise more now? Or what if I eat better after there's already been a diagnosis of a terminal illness, right? It's that, okay, but and that's also, again, is right kind of in line with that denial. Like, this can't be, I just got to do X, Y, and Z more. So that's why I say these stages, and many clinicians obviously say that these stages, they don't have a linear path. They intersect, they cross all the time, because again, we are emotional creatures. So that's kind of what bargaining could look like. The next one is going to be depression, and I'm not going to say that, but I would imagine that most of you have an idea of what depression is, whether you felt it or not. But in all honesty, we've all felt depression. It's just that some is clinically diagnosable and some is something that we just kind of work through on our own. But depression, right? So that's that feeling loss. That's that kind of helpless feeling. That's that sadness, that deep sadness, right? That's that feeling of being stuck. So when we're talking about depression in itself has so many symptoms. It could be insomnia, you can't sleep, you sleep too much, you overeat, you're not eating enough. It is so many levels to depression that would need its own video. But depression is definitely a part of one of those stages. The next one, the last one, is going to be acceptance. So this doesn't mean that you are okay with what happened. It just means that you feel like you are prepared to move forward, not move on, move forward, right? You take that person with you as you go forward in life and you learn from the experiences, right? You have an understanding. You feel like you have an understanding of what this loss means to you, or, what this experience means to you, or you just understand that this is a part of the life experience. And in some cases, you may even sense, gratitude, right? So if we're talking about, let's say, the loss of a job or a breakup, at first it may be terrible, but at the end you're like, we needed to end this. This was going nowhere fast. At the end of this, I realized that I've learned a lot from this relationship, but yeah, I'm done, right? And that's what we talk about, grieving a breakup or the loss of a friend or whatever, right? You may grieve the loss of a really close friend, and at the end, you like, you know what? You were never really a friend. I've definitely learned some lessons from this relationship. So it could look a lot of different ways, but that's kind of what we talk about when we've gone through the 5 stages pretty briefly. Now, a big question about what I get is, when is this going to be over? That's fair. But in actuality, I don't know. And you don't know, and nobody knows. It is your personal healing journey. It is your personal journey of grieving. It is over when you say it's over. It may never be over, right? If it is somebody that is deeply close to you, you may always grieve them in some way. It just means that you are no longer letting that grief control your life. Okay? And grief again, you could feel like you've reached acceptance, right? And kind of revert all the way back to denial or all the way back to anger. And it's unfortunate, but it's true. It's a part of that process. You could be at depression and then find your way back to denial. You could be at anger and skip and feel like you're at acceptance, and you're really not at acceptance. It could be what I like to call a false positive. I've definitely seen that in therapy. I've seen a lot of, you know what, I'm past this. I feel good about this. And then as a clinician, I will purposely hit a trigger point just to kind of bring you back to reality, to remind you that you're not over this like you think you are. And denying it is definitely not going to help the clinical process.
Hey humans, just taking a second to pause the video and reminding you all to share, like, subscribe, and comment.
So it is something that I would trigger, right? Because you have to actually work through it. You can't get over it. You can't get under it. You just have to go through it. And you go through it at your pace. Some people grieve for 10 years. Some people grieve for 2 years. Some people grieve for 6 months. Some people grieve forever. It really depends on the loss. It depends on what it is. It depends on who you are. And it depends on its impact to you. You cannot. You can, but don't. Don't be that human that tells somebody when they should get over something. How dare you? Like, don't be that human. Don't be that human. Be compassionate, be patient, and help a person work through it. Now, if they are stagnant and they are not even attempting to work through it, don't tell them they should be over it. Advise them on how they can get help to move forward. You know, suggest therapy, suggest letter writing, suggest journaling, suggest many things, but don't tell them that they should just get over it. That's not fair, right? It's so unkind to treat someone in that way. If you can't handle what they're experiencing, say that. Say that to yourself and allow them to find somebody or to be in the presence of someone that can and that will respect their process. But don't be that person. So that's grief. That's brief tidbits of grief. And it is definitely one of those topics, obviously, that can go on for a very long time. We could probably do a video on every single topic, on every single stage. I just wanted to touch on it again because it is also the holiday time, and this is a time of happiness and joy, but it's also a time of grieving because this is when we realize that maybe we don't have a certain family member with us, or maybe we don't have the income that we thought we would because there was a job loss, or maybe we don't have the partner that we bought a present for 6 months ago because of their, it's now a breakup situation and you don't know what to do with the gift. And now that's a reminder. Now you're triggered. Now you're going back through depression. Now you're going back through anger and you want to break somebody's window. It could be a lot of different things that happen, especially around this time of year when it's supposed to be such a time of love and reflection and family and friendship. And because of that, you are absolutely going to trigger those emotions of grief. And I just want you to know that it's normal. It is normal. It is okay. It is reasonable. Forget normal. It is reasonable if you have gone through all of your stages of grief and it just seems like every year around this time or their birthday or whatever it was, you feel triggered. It's reasonable. Don't beat yourself up. Allow yourself to go through the process and just know you're going to come out on the other side a better person. All right. A better human. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you all for listening and be kind to each other. Don't let anybody push you over. Peace.